Let's find out more about the situation in the south. We have Vladislav Voloshin, colonel and spokesperson for the Defense Forces of Southern Ukraine, live with us in the studio. Mr. Vladislav, welcome. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Glory to Ukraine.
Glory to the heroes. To start, please tell us about the overall situation in the south. What is the current operational situation as of now at 12:19 on Monday, May 18th?
The situation in the south. There are no significant or drastic changes. Enemy assaults continue and the enemy is actively using aviation. In addition, there have been quite a large number of kamikaze drone strikes on our positions and on settlements located near the line of contact. Furthermore, the enemy forces are actively attempting to break through our positions. They are currently carrying out a wide range of destructive sabotage operations deep within our defenses, as one might describe the situation. Such specialized sabotage groups are trying to infiltrate and push significantly deeper into our primary defensive lines. But we are destroying them. We are conducting active and rather intensive reconnaissance search and strike operations, eliminating such groups. In addition, the defense forces of Ukraine in the south, on certain sections of the front line, are actively conducting counterattacks, trying to regain control over previously lost positions and territories. So the situation for us remains without any significant changes in either direction, but it is still quite intense.
Mr. Vladislav, let's get more specific now. You have already mentioned that the Russians in the south are using main gas pipelines. And these routes are being used to infiltrate the rear of the defense forces. How widespread have such infiltration attempts become?
What we're talking about is that the Russian occupiers are trying to use a section, a certain stretch of a gas pipeline for infiltration or covert movement. This pipeline was built back in the 1960s and was used to supply gas to the south of Zaporozhye and Kherson regions, as well as to transport gas to Crimea. That's why the enemy seeks to use this gas pipeline, a certain section of it, to pass under the line of contact, unnoticed by Ukrainian units who are, let's say, defending this part of the front line, to get through and emerge in the rear, infiltrate, gather there, and continue their actions aimed at capturing our territory. We knew that the enemy would try to use this pipeline. By the way, he was preparing for it. He didn't just see the pipeline, climb in, and come out somewhere else. He set up an entire system, let's say, prepared this pipeline for moving his groups through it. He even stretched a cable there to transport various. Let's consider the various supplies such as heavy cargo, essential ammunition, and general logistics. He also carefully set up vital communications and observation posts. There was even significant movement using electric scooters inside, primarily because the actual diameter of the pipeline is quite large, measuring up to a full meter in width. The thickness of this pipe, the wall of the pipe itself, is also, let's say, quite substantial. However, the pipe itself has damage in several places of this kind, and the enemy, having entered it, tried to get as close as possible to the line of contact so as not to be detected while coming out and to continue their sabotage activities. But we were expecting it. And this specific pipe, for some of these Russian assault troops, it actually became the very path that led them to voluntarily surrender their weapons, primarily because the Russian command was simply driving them there without any other choice. These assault groups, even Russian prisoners told us that after an assault group went in there, the entrances behind them were welded shut so they couldn't come back, and so that Ukrainians couldn't use that gas pipeline. So it's quite, let's say, an interesting situation there, but the defense forces are holding on and they kept it under control, and we expected that the Russians would come out from there. We specifically expected that they would come out to us in London.
Mr. Vladislav, thank you for the prompt information. Thank you for joining us. Vladislav Voloshin, colonel and spokesperson for the Defense Forces of Southern Ukraine, was live with us in the studio. After the massive drone attack on May 17th, the situation for residents of major Russian cities, particularly Moscow and St. Petersburg, will continue to worsen. The head of the Center for Countering Disinformation, Andriy Kovalenko, called on Russians to demand an end to the war or a change in the policies of the Russian leadership. Let me remind you, the day before Moscow and the Moscow region suffered a massive drone attack. There is information about the heat and fire at the Moscow oil refinery in Kapotna, as well as about the strikes on the Design Bureau enterprise. Rainbow and Dubna. Fires and damage were also recorded in Zelenograd, Khimki, Klubna, and Odintsovo. Due to the attack, there were disruptions in the operation of Sheremetyevo airport. The Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Oleksandr Syrskyi, reported on the implementation of enhanced standards for collecting and recording data on war crimes committed by the Russian Federation. According to the Commander-in-Chief, every war crime must be inevitable, punished.
Every Russian war crime will be documented. Every piece of evidence will be preserved. Every perpetrator will be identified. The Russian aggressor systematically violates the rules of warfare. Every day, the occupiers commit crimes against Ukrainian servicemen and civilians, shell civilian infrastructure, and use terror, torture, and executions. We must record information about every war crime, every fact, every piece of evidence. All of this is digital evidence for the court. Oleksandr Syrskyi, Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine.
Serhiy Kuzan, head of the Ukrainian Center for Security and Cooperation, is now live with us. Mr. Serhiy, welcome. Good afternoon.
Greetings, Victoria.
To start, let's talk about Ukrainian drones in Moscow. The commander of the Unmanned Systems Forces, Madyar, stated that Moscow is no longer an unreachable target for Ukrainian drones. How dangerous is the very fact of regular strikes on Moscow in political, psychological, and military terms?
Undoubtedly, it's not just a military objective. It's not that simple. In Moscow, but also in the Moscow region, our defense forces are being pursued when they carry out such strikes. But it's also a military political matter, because like any quasi-empire, and Russia is in fact already such an entity, the last land-based empire, or at least a state that strives to be one. Of course, there is an administrative center that absolutely all regions, without exception, pay attention to. All those republics, all those peoples who still remain under the control of the Russian Federation today, they are watching to see whether the metropolis can defend itself, whether Moscow, whether the Kremlin can defend itself. And if black smoke is constantly rising over Moscow, if there are always some strikes, even on residential buildings, then absolutely all subjects of the Russian Federation understand 100 air defense sites, the newest S-400 complexes, 80 Panzers and Tors. All of this protects Moscow, and yet none of it can actually protect it. So what can be said then about the other regions of the empire? Accordingly, this is a signal for the local elites, as well as for certain military or leadership figures in the armed forces and special services, that it really is time to look around, time to pay attention to the neighbors, time to consider Ukraine's position, because Moscow is losing control of the situation.
How might Russians take advantage of this signal they are receiving?
There could be different scenarios for how the Russians will use it. I'm not talking about ordinary Russians, but among Putin's elites, of course, dissatisfaction with the war is growing, which brings them nothing except for those 20 families close to Putin who are carrying out a massive redistribution of Russian property. And Putin understands this perfectly well. That's exactly why he is shutting down, so to speak, foreign internet, foreign messengers, in order to prevent coordination and to avoid a repeat. A new Prigozhin.
Mr. Serhiy, I'd like to ask you about the numbers. The mayor of Moscow stated that more than 120 drones were allegedly destroyed in the capital region of the aggressor country. The Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation claims that air defense systems intercepted and destroyed them over the regions of Russia. On the night of May 17th, 556 Ukrainian drones. How should we regard these numbers? To what extent can Russia downplay the scale?
Indeed, Russia always downplays the scale if the strikes were successful. And the targets hit were specifically military facilities or facilities belonging to the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation. So this is how the real number of strikes gets concealed. And this only indicates that it is no longer possible to get away with general statements about falling debris. And it turns out that even such well-protected facilities as airfields, just like oil refineries, oil pumping facilities, factories, and likewise facilities that supply highly sophisticated microelectronics for weapons, including missiles of the Russian Federation, all of these facilities were successfully struck by our drones.
In your opinion, will there be more of our strikes on the Russian capital, or will everything happen in a mirrored fashion?
Undoubtedly, the very dynamics of the strikes indicate that we are getting closer and closer to the Russian capital. And if not so long ago, even at the beginning of the year, we were, of course, glad that their oil refineries were burning somewhere on the outskirts. Now the number has tripled compared to the same period, for example, in 2025. The number of such strikes, specifically on special structures, that is, these columns, oil refining facilities, and also all other military targets. In other words, the ring around Moscow is gradually tightening, and there will, of course, be more and more strikes. At first, strikes are hitting the Moscow region, where their research and production facilities are concentrated. That is, the brains of their military machine. And then, of course, there will be even more strikes, and on the city of Moscow itself.
Regarding the documentation of Russian crimes, Ukraine is essentially creating a digital architecture for recording the war crimes of the Russian Federation. What does this change for us and for the world?
For the world, this is an incredible turning point. All wars up to this point have been conducted according to the law of the strong. Whoever has the informational resources, that is, whoever is the victor in the war, imposes their interpretation on the world. We saw this during the Georgian campaign in 2008. In fact, the world trusted the interpretation of the Russian Federation, but now we are saying that documenting war crimes is no longer just the responsibility of the media or specialized human rights organizations. According to the order of Commander-in-Chief Syrskyi, it is now also one of the components of the work of our stable machine, the armed forces of Ukraine. Moreover, stationary situational awareness tools are being used, such as Delta, and exactly in the same manner. How are hits recorded? That is, all these points awarded as a result of successful strikes on military targets, on personnel, on equipment, they are all recorded with video confirmation. The same goes for war crimes. We will have video confirmation, we will have the date, time, unit, and location reference. That is a completely comprehensive evidence base for a future trial against Russian criminals. So that this evidence base already at a systemic level, as an official document from our armed forces of Ukraine, can be defended and directly used to demand compensation, as well as to show the whole world how the Russian Federation wages war. Because the way Russia fights, no one has fought like this for a long time.
How difficult is it in general to document war crimes? In combat conditions, when there is often no access, for example, to certain locations, after an attack or during an attack?
Indeed, until recently, throughout the entire history of wars, most war crimes remained undisclosed. And it was necessary to hold special international criminal tribunals only after the victory over the aggressor in order to prove the involvement of war criminals. That is, evidence had to be gathered bit by bit. Testimonies from people who directly suffered from such acts, genocide, and other war crimes. So now, with the development of drone technologies, video signal transmission, and its storage and accumulation, Ukraine is the first country to test this undoubtedly global system. And so today we can't even imagine how significant this is for the world. Because Ukraine is showing that in the future, there will be less cruel and inhumane treatment in wartime conditions. This will happen under one condition: if these war crimes are properly recorded, processed, analyzed, and systematized. Ukraine is responsible for this. I have no doubt about this. It will be done at the highest level. But they must also be confirmed, made public in courts, and compensation must be collected. And the next countries that might consider starting a similar war as the Russian Federation will think very carefully about whether to wage war in such an inhumane, barbaric way as Russia is doing today.
Mr. Serhiy, thank you for your explanations. Serhiy Kuzan, head of the Ukrainian Center for Security and Cooperation, was in touch with the studio.